Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring how our brains understand the world.
Should be fun.
Yeah, I was looking through the sources you sent over, and it's amazing how our brains are like the guessing machines. They're always trying to predict and make sense of things.
It really makes you question everything, like how we experience reality.
Yeah.
We think our perceptions are accurate, and our emotions are real, but our brains are way more involved in creating our realities than we realize.
Exactly. So the main source today is a YouTube interview with a neuroscientist, Lisa Feldman Barrett. And she uses this term, body budget.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So she explains that our brains are focused on, keeping us alive, keeping our bodies working.
Keeping the lights on.
Right. It's not always about being, completely accurate. It's more about survival.
I see. So it's like our brain is always running a balance sheet.
Yeah, exactly.
Making sure we have enough energy and resources for whatever we encounter.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
I think she even compares it to like managing a financial budget, but instead of money, it's things like glucose or water and salt, like essential stuff.
Oh, wow. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So like if you exercise, that's like a withdrawal from your body budget.
Right.
And then things like rest or food would be deposits.
Exactly. So this concept of a body budget can actually help us understand how our choices and experiences, every day, they affect our health and our well-being.
I see, yeah. So like if your body budget is always in the red, like if you're constantly stressed or you don't get enough sleep, that can really impact your mental and physical health.
It definitely can.
Now, the other source we have for this deep dive, it's a written reflection. It goes into how this body budget idea connects to some really big questions like free will.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and even the nature of truth. And there's a mention of Carl Jung's concept of the libido, which I thought was really interesting.
Okay, so how does libido fit into all of this?
Yeah, so in this context, it refers to the brain's drive to conserve energy. Like it's always looking for the easiest way to think about things, the quickest return on investment, so to speak.
Interesting. So our brains, they like to stick with what's easy.
Yeah.
Even if it might not be totally true. It's like it prefers simple explanations, familiar patterns.
Exactly, yeah. So even though our brains are incredible at, making predictions, they can also be kind of lazy.
Right.
They want to stick with what's comfortable, even if it's not entirely accurate.
And that's where things start to get really interesting when we talk about emotions.
Because, we tend to think of emotions as these automatic reactions to what's happening around us. But Lisa Feldman Barrett, in her interview, she suggests it's way more complex than that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm listening.
She says that not every culture even experiences emotions as separate from thoughts. Yeah, which to, people who have grown up in Western cultures sounds a little strange.
Yeah, that does sound a little strange.
Yeah. So she makes this distinction between affect.
Okay.
Which is the raw feeling, the general feeling of, is this pleasant or unpleasant? Am I feeling activated or calm? And then there's emotion.
Got it.
The emotion is how we actually interpret those feelings.
I see. So affect is like the raw data.
Yeah.
And emotion is how we try to make sense of it, like put a label on it based on, our experience and how we understand things.
Exactly. And that's where this concept of a conceptual toolkit comes in.
Oh, okay. A conceptual toolkit. I like that.
Yeah. So it's you have a mental toolkit and it's filled with different concepts and ideas. And the more tools you have in this toolkit, the better you are at understanding complex situations.
I see. The more tools you have, the better equipped you are to make sense of the world.
Exactly. So it's our culture gives us, a set of concepts or tools that we use to make sense of our feelings and experiences.
Right. Our brains have this basic, an operating system to regulate the body.
Yeah.
And then culture gives us the apps, right?
Yeah.
And those apps are what shape our experiences, our interpretations.
I love that analogy. And there's a great example that Barrett uses. She talks about this black and white image.
Okay.
And at first, it just looks like, a bunch of blobs.
Uh-huh.
But once you've seen it in color and you recognize what it is, oh, that's a snake.
Right.
Suddenly you can see all these details in the black and white image.
It's like your brain downloads the snake app, and then it can understand the information differently.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah. So it's all about prediction. Our brains are always making predictions and trying to fill in the blanks based on, the concepts we have.
Yeah.
And those concepts come from, our culture where we grew up.
That makes sense. So it's not just about what we're seeing or feeling, it's about how we're interpreting it.
Exactly. And this, I think this connects to what the written source was talking about.
Yeah.
The difference between, knowing facts and understanding truth.
I see. Yeah. So just because we have all the facts, it doesn't mean we really understand what's going on.
It's like having all the pieces of a puzzle.
Yeah.
But you don't have the picture on the box.
Exactly.
So you don't know how it fits together.
Right. And our culture kind of gives us that picture on the box.
Right.
It helps us to make sense of all the pieces. But, this brings up another interesting point. What about the limitations of, this toolkit that we have?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
Because if we're relying on a limited set of concepts to understand the world, we might be missing some really important information or even misinterpreting situations.
Yeah, we could be.
This makes me think about something that both of the sources actually touch on.
Okay.
The impact of our interactions with other people.
Oh, right.
Barrett, in the interview, she actually says that humans are caretakers of each other's nervous systems.
Wow, that's a really interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
So our interactions, they can actually, impact each other's body budgets in a good way or a bad way.
Exactly. So it's not just about managing our own internal resources.
Yeah.
It's also about realizing that we're, part of this larger system.
Right. We're all connected.
Yeah. And we're contributing to the well-being of others.
Which creates an interesting tension, right?
Totally.
Because, in Western culture, there's a big emphasis on individual rights and freedoms.
Yeah.
But our biology is telling us, we need connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like those two things kind of butt heads.
Right.
It's this philosophical tug of war.
It is, yeah. So what do we do about that?
Well, Barrett, she actually argues that we should take more responsibility for each other's well-being.
Oh.
Even if it means, sometimes we have to curb our own anger or just practice being more curious about other people.
I see. So trying to see things from their perspective.
Yeah. And she has this really powerful example where she talks about engaging with people who were sending her, hate mail.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and instead of just, dismissing them,
Right.
she tried to connect with them.
That's amazing.
And understand where they were coming from. And sometimes it actually led to, a real conversation.
Wow.
And even some of those people changed their views.
That's incredible. So it's a reminder that even when things feel really polarized,
Yeah.
there's always a possibility for connection. Maybe even understanding.
Absolutely. And who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe in that process of trying to understand someone else, we actually learn something new ourselves.
Right. We expand our own toolkit.
Exactly. So I feel like we've covered a lot of ground in this first part.
Yeah, we have.
From, starting with brains as these prediction machines to talking about the role of culture and how it shapes how we see the world.
Yeah.
To the power of, expanding our conceptual toolkit.
Absolutely. It's a lot to think about.
It is, but we're just getting started. There's a lot more to explore.
I'm excited to hear what else you have to share.
This idea of emotional granularity, it's really fascinating. If we have more nuanced emotional experiences, could that actually help us make better choices?
It really can. It might sound, a little too simplistic, but research shows that the more words we have for our feelings, the more it can actually change how we feel and react.
So instead of just feeling bad,
Right.
we can be like, oh, am I feeling anxious?
Right.
Or frustrated? Or maybe it's disappointment.
Exactly. And having that finer resolution,
Yeah.
it can really help us understand what's going on and guide our responses.
It's like instead of just seeing the world in black and white,
Right.
now we have this whole spectrum of colors.
Precisely. And then we can use that richer understanding to make more informed decisions.
I see what you mean. So if you can identify that you're feeling overwhelmed,
Yeah.
then you might realize, okay, I need to take a break. Or maybe I should ask someone for help.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It gives you more options.
And it's interesting because Barrett even mentions that her daughter
What?
came up with this term for a specific emotional state, emotional flu.
I love that.
It's like feeling down, but it's temporary
Uh-huh.
and it's not really tied to any specific problem.
Right. It's just like this feeling that washes over you.
Exactly. And having a name for it can actually help you to not overreact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is just the emotional flu. It'll pass.
But how does this all connect back to the body budget idea?
That's a great question. So remember, our brains are always trying to keep our bodies regulated.
Yeah, keeping everything in balance.
Exactly. So when we understand that our emotions have all these different flavors and intensities, we can start to see how they're impacting our internal resources.
So like if we're feeling stressed or anxious, that's going to use up our body budget.
Exactly. It's like a withdrawal from your energy bank.
But then feeling calm and content,
that's more like a deposit.
So it's like we're not just managing our finances, we're also managing our emotions.
Exactly. And things like getting enough sleep, eating nutritious food, spending time with loved ones, those become less about shoulds and more about strategic investments in our well-being.
I love that perspective. It's like we have more control than we think.
We do.
Yeah.
And that brings us to this idea of being caretakers of each other's nervous systems.
Yeah, because it's one thing to understand this for ourselves, but how do we actually put it into practice in our interactions with others?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Especially in a culture that prioritizes individual needs.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly being pulled in these different directions.
Right, so it requires a real shift in perspective.
Yeah.
You know, instead of immediately judging someone or getting defensive when they do something we don't like. What if we try to understand their perspective?
Like, remember that everyone is the hero of their own story.
Exactly. Their actions might make perfect sense to them.
Yeah.
Even if we disagree.
And that's where empathy comes in.
Absolutely. It's not about condoning bad behavior.
Right.
It's about trying to see the world through their eyes.
To understand their motivations.
Exactly. And to remember that everyone is dealing with their own internal struggles, their own body budget challenges.
It's like we all have these invisible backpacks full of experiences and beliefs.
Right, and those backpacks are shaping how we see the world.
So even when we disagree, we can still choose to interact with each other in ways that are supportive and compassionate.
Exactly. It's about creating a social environment that promotes understanding rather than judgment.
And this makes me think about Barrett's example with the hate mail.
Oh yeah, that's such a powerful story.
Instead of ignoring those people or fighting back, she actually reached out to try to understand them.
And, you know, sometimes that led to genuine dialogue.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It's a reminder that even in the most heated debates, there's always potential for connection.
It might not always be easy.
It's not.
But it's so important if we want to create a world where people feel seen and understood.
It is. And it all comes back to this idea of being caretakers of each other's nervous systems.
So what about free will then?
Ah, yes. The age-old question.
Because if our perceptions and emotions are so heavily influenced by our body budgets and our conceptual toolkits, does that mean we're just puppets?
Well, what if instead of thinking of free will as this absolute thing, we think of it as the ability to become aware of those influences?
Okay.
And then choose how we respond.
So we're not just reacting automatically.
Exactly. We can learn to pause, to reflect, to choose a different path.
So it's not about being controlled by our emotions.
Right.
It's about learning to regulate them.
And it's not about being limited by our cultural concepts. It's about choosing to expand them.
So we're not just passive recipients of our experiences. We can actually shape them.
We can become the architects of our own conceptual toolkits.
I love that analogy. So we're not just building our own realities, we're also co-creating the reality we share with others.
Exactly. And that's where communication and curiosity become so vital.
Because if everyone's operating with a different toolkit, how can we ever hope to understand each other, let alone agree on anything?
It's a challenge, but it's not impossible. The key is to recognize that our perspective is just one of many. And to be open to hearing other perspectives, even when they challenge our own.
So it's not always about winning the argument. It's about learning from each other.
Exactly. And expanding our understanding of the world.
Which brings us back to Barrett's point about the importance of social connection. We're not meant to go through life alone.
We need each other.
We need to share our experiences.
To learn from each other.
To support each other.
That's how we create a more compassionate and just world.
I'm still thinking about how our brains are, like, always predicting things based on what's happened before. Even when those predictions, you know, aren't helpful or accurate. It's kind of wild when you realize how much of what we think is real is actually just made up by our brains.
It really is. And all of this is happening, like, all the time. Under the surface, we don't even realize it.
It's like our brains are always running these simulations, and everything we experience, our perceptions, our feelings, even how we act, it's all part of the simulation.
Like we're living in a virtual reality, but it's all created by our own minds.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you know, our culture and how we were raised and who we hang out with, all of that shapes that virtual reality too.
So like how much of what we think is real is actually just, a product of all those influences?
Right. It makes you wonder, like, what are we taking for granted? What are we assuming is true when it might not be?
I think that's why it's so important to have that, that diverse conceptual toolkit we were talking about. The more tools we have in that toolkit, the more flexible we can be in how we think and how we respond to things.
It's like we're breaking free from those automatic predictions our brains are making, the ones that might be holding us back.
Exactly.
Instead of just seeing the world through one lens,
right.
Now we have this whole set of lenses. And we can use them to see things more clearly from all these different angles.
Which ultimately, helps us make better choices in our lives, in our relationships, at work.
It even affects how we feel about ourselves.
It does. It all comes down to being open to learning, to growing, to expanding how we understand things.
And that's something we can do our whole lives. There's always something new to discover.
Absolutely.
So, to wrap things up, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We covered so much ground today.
From those guessing machine brains to the role of culture and how it shapes us. And of course, that powerful conceptual toolkit.
And we talked about the importance of managing that body budget.
Right. Making sure we have the resources we need to thrive.
We explored emotional granularity too, learning to understand our feelings on a deeper level.
And throughout all of it, the theme of connection kept coming up. How we're all connected and how important it is to take care of each other.
Absolutely. So, as we go about our day, let's remember the power of our brains and the impact we have on each other.
And let's keep questioning, keep learning, keep exploring. There's a whole world out there waiting to be discovered.
Until next time, happy diving!